Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Asma Shandi. I am a petroleum engineer graduated from American University of Ras Al Khaimah, and I will be your moderator for today. On behalf of BioPetro, Arab Oil and Gas Academy, and SPE Egypt section, I would like to welcome all of you to the last session of our short course Cement Evaluation, the Basics and Beyond, presented by distinguished speaker Mr. Kirk Harris. Before I present our speaker, I would like to remind you if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box and use the chat box in a professional way to answer Mr. Harris' questions. Now, our speaker is Mr. Kirk Harris. He is the technical advisor for Throwbond, which provides technical support for cementing and bond log interpretation. Prior to his work of Throwbond, Kirk was the global cementing advisor for Occidental Petroleum, Talisman Energy, and Repsol. He began his career at Halliburton, where he worked as cementer operation and research engineer and a technology manager. He has been the original cementing advisor for Asia Pacific, the North Sea, Europe, Africa, the Permian Basin, and the Gulf of Mexico. Kirk graduated from Purdue University with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. Today, this session will be a comprehensive look at the pressure integrity tests that are conducted after cementing of surface and intermediate casing strengths. So please pay attention and welcome Mr. Kirk Harris. Mr. Kirk, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much again for the introduction, and it's good to be here for the fourth session of cement evaluation. I had the opportunity to think about evaluation once again this week as I was interpreting bond logs. That's what I do both for fun and for commercial purposes. But I was thinking, I started with Halliburton and I learned cementing. I was just talking with Ahmed and I drove the trucks, I cemented the wells and learned everything about cementing, but I didn't learn about cement evaluation. That's something I think I lacked. And so I had to kind of find that out for myself. And so we started with bond logs for the first 3 weeks. We're going to move away from bond logs. And now we're going to look at evaluating the intermediate strings or the surface casings. And we do that by means of something called a shoe test. Before we start though, I would like to review. As I do, I'll put in a quick advertisement. Here are a couple free webinars that Throwbond will present over the next few weeks. We actually have a winter series that we're going to be looking at cementing, which also includes bond logs. But here's the review for you for bond logs. Do you see on this chart or this advertisement, do you see the bond log portion on the right? What is that called? What is that part of the bond log called? And this happens to be actually a compensated attenuation tool. Thank you, Glenn. That is correct. And you can use the chat feature to talk with me today. I'll be asking some questions throughout. Remember, I like to ask questions. That gives me the time to sip coffee while you're answering. I'll have one more sip before we begin. Thank you. It is the VDL, the variable density log. If I were going to interpret this, and I put this up here because I posted this on LinkedIn this week, and we get varying opinions. I put it up there, and all it is a VDL, and I ask, is this cement, or is this free pipe, or is this good cement or bad cement? What do we have here? Just looking at the VDL, and that's our review of the past 3 weeks. Tell me what you think, and maybe give a reason why you believe that. Receive some interesting feedback on LinkedIn. What do you think? Good cement, bad cement, no cement, channel? What do we have here? And after you take a quick guess, or as you think about that, let me ask you this. Maybe you'll answer this question. What is the first thing we will do if we're going to interpret this log? And of course, you're seeing only a part of the log, but what is the first thing we'll do to begin to interpret? The first step in bond log interpretation, at least according to the way that we have taught it the last 3 weeks. Don't take too long because I don't have that much coffee. There you go. Okay, I've got 2 answers. Omar has said, I think that the cement is bad cement. We have to define bad cement, what's bad and what's good, but I think it is bad because of the straight lines. You see the straight lines here. We do not like straight lines. That's energy coming down the casing. We call that casing ring. We also have collars here. We call them chevron patterns that you can see. But we have a couple people who have said, let's construct the well. And that's exactly right. That's what we would do in this situation. So whenever you get a section of the log, the amazing thing is this log, which I interpreted this week for a client, was misinterpreted by a very big logging company. And they said there was no cement there. Of course, they were comparing this to a section that had really good cement, because I agree with Omar. Whether this is, quote, bad cement or not, it is poorly bonded cement. That is for sure. But when we construct the well, we draw where we think the cement should be, then we would have seen this clearly is in an area that contains lead cement. Very weak, lightweight lead cement. So it will give us straight lines, but not overly big straight lines. It will give us chevron patterns, but look how they are damped. See that? The damping of the collars is very important. Then we see formation signals, which means we are connected to the formation in some way. Over here, we pick up some fluid arrivals. But when we construct the well, we will find this is lead cement. One other point I want to review with you. Look how consistent these straight lines are. If there is cement here, it is likely not a channel, because channel, you get an inconsistency in the lines. You usually get a break. Here, all of the bonding is exactly the same because all of the cement is the same, and it is a weak, lightweight cement. I don't know why we pump so many weak, lightweight cements. We save money. It fills the well bore. It's light so we don't break the formation down. But we can pump some really weak cements, and here we see it there. But it is likely providing the kind of zone isolation that we needed for this well, which was to prevent fluids from flowing while we treated the well. Got another question for you just as we open up. I don't know if you know where this is, but think of the places that you've been. What you think is maybe the most beautiful place you've been, or the most interesting place that you've been. As I think about cement evaluation, my mind goes here. Do you know where this is? I moved here a long time ago. Boy, a really long time ago. I had 14 years with Halliburton when I moved here. This is the ocean of southern Australia, actually southeast Australia, in Victoria, just south of Melbourne. You can go along the ocean there, a beautiful place. But what I remember about Melbourne during my time was that I thought I was a cementing expert. 14 years with Halliburton, but maybe I wasn't such an expert after all. If you look at this map and you take a left and you go out into the ocean, it will take you to a place called Bass Strait. It's the body of water between Australia and Tasmania. And there we were drilling wells. I was in-house on a team that was drilling we were drilling wells there. So I spent a lot of time out in the beautiful blue waters of Bass Strait. And I was out there one day and we were conducting a shoe test. And I remember going on to the cementing unit. We will conduct a shoe test, and I'll explain what a shoe test is in a bit. But we're conducting a shoe test. We do that on the cementing unit. And while we were doing that, they gave me the data as it was being generated, and they said, "Kirk, what do you think?" And I was the cementing expert. We were testing the shoe of a cement job. And I said to myself, you know, I have no idea what we're doing right now. I've never been on a shoe test. It was my first time. But I'm the cementing expert. So if I'm the expert, I probably should know this. So when you're the expert and someone asks you a question about that subject, basic question that you don't know, what do? Well, if it's not going to harm or endanger people or property, you usually ask someone else. I found that if you don't know the answer, if you ask someone the question, sometimes you'll at least get an answer. So I faked my way through that evening, and then I said, I'm going to learn shoe tests. That's one lesson I want to relate to you overall. Never stop learning. Do not think because you have X number of years in that you've learned everything, or that there's some things you haven't experienced. See, I had worked areas that had not done too many shoe tests or the type of shoe tests that we were conducting. I had no experience in it. And again, even in cementing, I had been teaching cementing. I had been in research. I still had not been taught shoe tests. And that was about to change after my time in Australia. And I want to share much of that with you of how and why we do the shoe tests. Here's what we'll cover in the next hour. We're going to talk just about the basics, some terminology. We're going to discuss the difference, and this is a big one, between a formation integrity test, FIT, and a leak-off test, LOT. Both of those fall under the umbrella of a shoe test. We'll go through the steps of conducting a shoe test, and then a big one, we'll talk about interpreting the shoe test. Along the way, we'll talk about various oil company practices and why they conduct shoe tests. We're going to probably skip right over, for time's sake, of cementing the shoe, but we'll talk about it, and we will look at squeezing the shoe. If the shoe test fails, it is followed by a cement squeeze to fix the shoe. And so let's get into all of this. We'll look at some terminology today, and we'll go through some slides on most of these. Everything we're doing here, whether it's a casing test or a leak-off test or a formation integrity test, falls under pressure integrity tests. If you hear PIT, then we're pressuring something up to see if it's good or bad. As part of the shoe test, we need to do a casing test in the proper manner. So a casing test, pressure testing the casing before we completely drill out our casing shoe, is a part of the test. There's something called a limit or jug test. That is when usually we have a large open hole section that we want to pressure up. It's a rarely used word, but jug test, we will call that. Then we'll talk about a formation integrity test, the leak-off test. I'll show you more detail on those. We'll also look at a pump and hold LOT and an extended leak-off test. So what is the purpose of a shoe test. And I'll show you a picture in a bit of a shoe. It is the bottom of a casing string that we've cemented this casing string, and it's the bottom part of this string we're going to drill out and drill ahead into new formation. That area right at the bottom, at the end of the casing, is our casing shoe. What is the purpose? Thank you. Determine mud weight. That's one reason. What are we testing when we perform a shoe test? Looking for the weaker point. Purpose to test that cement annulus, to check on formation permeability. We'll talk about some of that. Very good, appreciate it. As someone just said, determining mud weight. I think that is the main reason for conducting the shoe test, to make sure that we have isolated and have integrity to know how much mud weight we can stand as we drill the next hole section. We run shoe tests to make sure we can get safely to the bottom of this well as we drill. What are we testing when we perform a shoe test? Well, if you include the casing test, we are testing the casing, the cemented annulus, as someone has mentioned, and the new well bore. I put 10 feet of new well bore. We're going to drill out all of the cement from the bottom in that what we call the shoe track. We're then going to drill new formation. For example, in the Gulf of Mexico, you cannot drill more than 50 feet of new formation before you do a shoe test. And most will drill about 10 feet of new formation. So again, we have cemented the well. We've pumped cement in, and we've hopefully have a great cement job. We drill out the casing and we drill new formation. I should have a drill bit on here. We can go back in and do a shoe test open-ended, but we should have a drill bit on here at this point. And then we apply pressure, and the pressure is going against, obviously, the casing. It's going against the cemented annulus, and it's going against the formation. Another way to state that, we are testing the well bore. We're seeing what the strength of the well bore is. As a matter of fact, the formation, we may not even be getting the actual strength of the formation. We're getting the strength of that well bore, which contains formation. For the formation integrity test, we pressure up, and we do not pump or break anything unless it happens to break by accident or early. So we are running a shoe test. We are pumping a volume of fluid, pressuring up against that well bore, and we're going to monitor pressure versus volume. For the formation integrity test, we're just going to pressure up. We do not want to leak off. We do not want to frack. We do not want to pump into. And so we will have a maximum pressure that will be required. It's what we expect. It's what we need to drill the next hole section. And as we pump volume, we will pressure up, and it was hopefully is going to act about like a casing test, no leak off, and that is an FIT. We will then allow it to bleed off. I'm just here showing the pump up pressure. For a leak off test, a couple different things can happen. As we pressure up, we can start to lose volume in the wellbore through permeability of the wellbore. As we pressure up, we start leaking off. If we leak off in that way, as we pump volume at a certain point, we're going to have an inflection as we start to leak off. There's another kind of leak off test, and that is where we pump to where we're no longer just leaking off, we're creating a crack, or we're fracturing the rock, and then we're leaking off within the fracture as well. It can look different for different types of rock and different types of situations, but it may look like this, for example, where it's not just a gradual loss of fluid, but we have a strong inflection point where we start to open a crack and to leak off into that fracture. Or we may catastrophically break the rock and have a sharp drop in pressure. Then we have a pump and hold LOT. This is where we apply pressure. We pump a volume, which increases the pressure. Then we shut down and allow the pressure to drop. We then increase the pressure for pump a certain volume, and once again, allow it to drop. And we continue to do so until the end of our pumping process. And we calculate, or we chart where the leak off is occurring while we're pumping at the inflection point of that change in pressure, where it starts changing and starts increasing. There's more leak off. There's more leak off. Where that inflection occurs becomes our leak off point. This is a very conservative way of getting leak off. Pump in, allow it to bleed. Pump in, allow it to bleed. Then we have extended leak off. This is where we pump on it for a period of time, actually are fracking the rock. When we shut down, we allow it to bleed off. So we're pumping it up. We start getting some leak offs. Perhaps here we're opening up a crack. Perhaps here the crack is growing. Now we have an uncontrolled frac and we're pumping into it. When we shut down, we get a rock strength here, and then we start to allow it to leak off. At this point, we start to flow it back and try to get even a fracture closure pressure, a much more detailed leak off. Generally speaking, though, we're either going to run, and various companies will run those last two I showed you, but we'll run an FIT or an LOT. As a matter of fact, I would say on land, most of the time, we're running FITs. Offshore or on general exploration wells, we're often running LOTs. And if you're running an FIT and the rock cracks, your FIT has become an LOT. But generally, we're going to run safely up to a pressure of where we think the rock is strong. That usually occurs in hard rock kind of country. Or we're going to run a leak off where, as we're pumping, we're going to have to determine, the rock's going to tell us exactly, or the wellbore is, how strong it is. To calculate that shoe test value, you get the surface pressure that you achieve during your leak off, and we'll determine how we interpret what that pressure is, divided by your depth and a conversion factor, and then add to that your LOT mud weight. So you're basically getting a mud weight of what your surface pressure is, what that relates to, and you add it to your LOT mud weight. We can run pressure while drilling. In other words, we can run the pressure at the shoe and know exactly what that pressure is. So we take out that surface pressure, and then we already have our hydrostatic and our pump pressure recorded, and then we just divide it by, again, the depth and the conversion factor. Why do we run the shoe test? Here are the 8. We talked about them a bit before, but there are a lot of reasons to run the shoe test. As a cementing person, of course, what's on my mind most of the time is to test the cement job. Again, we're applying pressure across that cemented annulus. This is the concern I have with the cement job, is that we have some sort of channel, or we've over displaced the cement to where there is no cement around the shoe. Now understand, and I probably should come right out at the beginning and say, when we're doing a shoe test, and I'm going to show you some of the papers I've written, the data that I've gathered over the years of experience I've had doing and analyzing shoe tests. Now, I may save this, but I better just tell you up front. I think most of the time, it is not the cement job that's causing the problem. Most of the time, it's the formation. But sometimes, I have no doubt, it is the cement job. I've been there and experienced when we've drilled out and we've pressured up and we've seen returns all the way to surface. Sometimes I know it's the cement job. And my concern there is in a few areas. One, if I've over displaced my cement, shown on this bond log here, this is the bottom of the well, and my fluids go up into a weaker formation, then my cement is what I've tested, and my cement in that case has failed. We'll talk more about the cause in a bit. We test formation strength. We determine the mud weight. I want to go back and just say one thing about formation strength. There are 2 things you see right next to it is know the wellbore strength. There's a difference between formation strength and wellbore strength. The formation strength is the actual strength of the virgin rock. And we really have to break into it and break it down to get that formation strength. But we can get formation strength. We'll want to do that in many exploratory wells to understand that field. We mentioned determining mud weight. I need to know, and we'll talk about that here in a bit, about the importance of knowing the mud weight, but just getting the well to bottom is a big one, to be able to finish the well. We will use this, very important, to calculate kick tolerance. We're going to go through this very quickly. I'm not a well control expert, and I will not teach you kick tolerance, but a critical point in kick tolerance calculations is knowing the strength of the rock or the shoe test and the values that we get from it. Again, kick tolerance is the highest volume, as defined, the highest volume of gas in barrels that you can circulate out of the well for well control without breaking the well bore at the shoe. How much gas, how much pressure can come in? How much am I allowed to where I'll be able to circulate that out without hurting my well? And again, I won't go through this completely, but to calculate kick tolerance, and again, this is an amount of gas or fluid, but any fluid, but amount of gas, let's say, then we have to understand or get an estimation on the kick intensity. We're then going to calculate MAASP. We'll look at that next. From that, we get a kick height, how much height in the well bore, knowing the geometries of the well bore, and then what those volumes are, both down at the bottom at the drill collars and up at the shoe. And we're not going to go through kick tolerance. You'll have to go somewhere else for that. But I do want to mention the maximum allowable annular surface pressure. How much pressure on surface can we have without breaking that shoe down? It's the maximum allowable mud weight minus the current mud weight, again, times the depth and the conversion factor. And all I want to say about this, when you see MASP, the maximum allowable mud weight, which is a part of that calculation, comes from the shoe test. And so that's why the shoe test is so important in kick detection and in drilling the well safely. And again, that maximum allowable mud weight is going to come from our surface pressure, as we show how to calculate that again. Part of this is to satisfy regulations. You got to know the strength of your shoe before you're allowed to use a certain mud weight. You have to pass regulations. We cannot use a mud that's within 0.5 ppg in the Gulf of Mexico from what our shoe test was. This is important to me, and that's knowing the wellbore strength, because in fact, most of our leak-off tests, what we are measuring is wellbore strength. We may call it formation strength, but it's wellbore strength. The difference being what we coat that formation with, maybe filter cakes, can strengthen that formation, that wellbore, and make it much more difficult to break down, although the rock strength has remained the same. This will help us with casing points in future offsets. If we can find out how strong the shoe is, we'll know where to put the shoe when we drill in future wells. And then I just put this, I worked a lot in deep water, did a lot of shoe tests in deep water, and I'll show you an example of a shoe test in deep water. And we use that shoe test to help us manage the next hole section. I'll explain that in a bit. Here's how we conduct the shoe test. We do a casing test. We're down with our drill bit. We test the casing. We're going to test it at, in this case, I put a 1/2 barrel per minute. It could be a 1/4 or 3/4 barrel per minute. Often it's 1/2 barrels per minute. We want to test it at the same rate we're going to conduct the shoe test. We drill out the shoe track. We're drilling out the plugs. We're drilling out the cement. I was looking at a well yesterday. We were drilling out the shoe track for so long. It was pretty amazing. I never seen it take that long to drill out a shoe track. But we're drilling out that cement. It can be difficult sometimes. And we're going to drill out 10 feet of new formation. Just a point, if the casing test fails, what do? If your original casing test fails, then you have to go out and you have to get a packer. You got to find the leak and that sort of thing. And you have to trip, and it's a bit of a mess. What we found out, that probably the next best thing to do is to drill a little bit of the shoe track. We often will find if the casing test fails, it's failing out the bottom of the shoe track. And if we can grind on the cement a little bit, we can seal that off and get a proper casing test. Just an outside thought there. We then get our LOT form ready. We'll look at it. We have a maximum pressure we're going to go to, and we also have a minimum and maximum LOT volume. I need to add the word volume there. It's draw the minimum and maximum LOT volume lines. And again, we drill out the formation. We circulate a consistent drilling fluid. Preferably, it is the mud we're going to use the drill holes next hole section. Often it's not. We may do the leak off test with the water base and then switch out. Some of these things, as we talk about doing the tests, you're going to say, maybe they're not fair, or maybe they vary from what I know, and it will vary from company to company and situation to situation. Such as point 6. I just throw this in for fun. Some will spot a viscous pill on bottom or an LCM pill on bottom before doing the test. We then pull up into the previous casing, close the BOPs, and start pumping down the drill pipe, or you can pump through drill pipe and annulus at the same time, at the same rate, half barrel per minute, for example. We record the pressure for every quarter barrel that we pump. We continue pumping to maximum pressure or to maximum volume, or until we see what that leak off has been attained. After leak off, we pump a small amount of fluid. If while we're pumping, we get a sharp catastrophic drop in pressure, we're going to shut down, make sure there are no leaks. We're going to monitor the shut-in once we have shut down for 10 minutes, and then we're going to release the fluid and record the volume that we receive back. That's a general shoe test. Do we spot viscous pills on bottom? Here are some comments from 4 pretty big oil companies. I happen to talk to each of these. I had the opportunity to work in-house at several operators, so you get some of them official opinions, some of them are just company accepted practices. We do not spot viscous pills. This is cheating. We want to know the leak off. We want to use the same mud we're going to be drilling with. You put a big thick pill with LCM, you're blocking things, it's cheating. Another one, very conservative company, says no viscous pills. We are carrying our leak off all the way out until breakdown. We want formation strength. Putting viscous pills in there, building up the wellbore is not true formation strength. How about this one? Viscous pills are okay. Just as much as viscous LCM pills are okay when you lose circulation 100 feet below the shoe. The purpose of the shoe test is to test the shoe, not the formation. Interesting. How about this for a drilling ops manual for a pretty big company? On surface casing shoes, it is best to spot a high viscosity pill on bottom to plug sands, which could distort the test results. I hope you see just from these comments, people will run different tests. They'll do it in slightly different ways. They will interpret and are running the test for very different reasons sometimes. When you run a leak-off test, and this is kind of the crazy thing we'll go through here, there are actually 14. I'll throw a couple in at the end. When I run a leak-off test, I drill out my cement. I've got new formation. I apply pressure. And then I'm getting ready to interpret it. Understand the shape of my curve and the volumes I pump are all affected by these things. It's good to know that. I'm going to ask you, kind of give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on these different parameters. What do they do to the leak off value? Because let's be honest here, whether it's in deep water or whether it's on land, we want our leak off test to be high. We want a high pressure, high integrity so we can drill our well. We don't want the shoe failing. So we want our leak off value to go higher. Which of these things, if we have them or do them, which will make them go higher? What about rock strength? And you can just type in higher or lower. Rock strength, leak off test will be leak off test with more rock strength, I'm going to get a higher value. Thank you, Mohammed. Thanks, Glenn. What about pump rate? This is my coffee drinking time. And let me clarify, as I increase my pump rate, I'm throwing some curveballs here, obviously. I'm getting some higher and lower. I'll show you an example of this, but as I increase my pump rate, my pressures go higher before I leak off. We're trying to stuff a lot in, and we get that pressure buildup before it leaks. What about fluid viscosity? Omar says higher. Are you sure, Omar? Miriam agrees. Muhammad agrees. I better go with the audience here. The more viscous the fluid, the more difficult it is to penetrate into the crack or pore spaces. It goes higher. Fluid compressibility. If my compressibility is higher, what will happen? This may be a little of a tricky question. Imagine I'm pumping, but I'm compressing my fluid while I pump. As I compress it, I'll pump volume, but my pressure won't go up as high. It could even start to bend too soon. It's going to go down. It's lower. Formation permeability. I only think one or two of these are on the quiz, maybe one. Formation permeability. As my permeability increases, exactly, it goes lower. It's easier to leak off. How about if my hole is deviated? Increased azimuth and deviation. I don't have a lot of experience here. I get this from reading. It will go higher. We can have a plastic and elastic zone, and plastic failure of the rock that then goes into an elastic zone. It actually looks lower because we start looking at the plastic zone where we've broken the rock. It'll start to increase again, but we sometimes interpret it as lower. Formation ballooning, similar to compressibility, only my pressure will increase and increase. How about a pre-existing crack if my rock is already cracked? An important one, it will go down. Remember that one. It will go down because I don't have to initiate that crack. It's already been initiated. And it's easier to reopen a crack than it is to initiate that crack. A cement channel, if there is a channel there, will my LOT be higher or lower? It will be lower. What about time? Instead of running the leak off test, what if I just circulate for 4 hours? And I allow the formation to heal and I build filter cake. When I do that, if I allow more time to pass, I strengthen the well bore. We have some well bores that have a frac grading of 0.5 psi per foot. We can put calcium carbonate filter cake and take that up to 1 psi per foot. It's amazing. LCM and squeeze jobs. Almost, not always, but the huge majority of squeeze jobs we do, we'll talk about why that is, increase. I'll put two more here. One is oil-based muds. Pumping oils will give us a lower LOT, and so will temperature. Temperature increases will give us a lower LOT. These are just some of the factors that affect this leak off. And here's an actual leak off chart that I put together on a well long ago. Look what happened. Our first leak off is in red. We pumped that. The color is where we pumped. We then shut down and let it bleed off. And pumping at 1/4 barrel per minute, this is what we get. When we increase and run our second leak off test, we pump at a 1/2 barrel per minute. And you see the increase of pressure versus volume. If nothing else, without interpreting this, we get more pressure with the same volume pumped. And then after we squeeze the well, we get even a higher pressure per volume. And we're back to 1/4 barrel per minute there. Here you see two examples. A squeeze cement job increased. I will warn you, just because you squeeze the well with cement, don't necessarily say that it was a bad cement job, because you're also filling a crack as well. So let's interpret. We have about 25 minutes. Let's interpret the shoe test. I was talking with Ahmed before, and he said his deal is fracking. For just a few years, I fracked a lot, and these are what our frack jobs would look like. We'd pump up, we'd break it down, and then we'd start extending the fracture, and the pressure would ultimately go up. But these are large volumes we're pumping on a frack job. When we're talking about the leak-off test, we're looking at a very, very small part of the curve. We're pumping very, very small volumes. And here are the leak-off tests. So that's the part of kind of the curve we're looking at. Let's go through this. Curve A is the casing test. You see it there. Doesn't always have to be a perfectly straight line, but we show it here. The next curve, B, is the leak-off test. Curve C is what I call the maximum volume line. It is a rule of thumb where we apply the casing test and we double the volume. That's all we're doing there. We do not want to, as a rule of thumb, pump more than twice the casing volume on a basic leak-off test. And our minimum volume is the casing test. We want to pump at least what it took to do the casing test. I've had leak-off tests shut down early on before we even pumped enough volume as we would have had for the casing test. Here are the rates of failures. And let me give you just a quick background. After that trip I took out into Bass Strait and didn't know what I was doing, I determined to learn shoe tests. I actually studied in the Gulf of Mexico a total of about 4,000 shoe tests, wrote a paper on it. I then was asked by a company to come work for them. It's a company called Triton Engineering. They were a turnkey company, a branch of Noble Drilling, to do nothing but stop the failed shoe tests so that we could stop squeezing shoes and do a better job at that. And so that's all I did for this company every day, look at shoe tests. So some of the information you see here comes from my studies at Halliburton and my studies later on as I worked independently. Here are approximate shoe failure rates. For land wells, we have good success. In the Gulf of Mexico, and I just do these two because I had a lot of experience in these areas, although we shoe tested all over the world. 15% failure rates in the Gulf of Mexico. In deep water, 25% at least in the early days of deep water. So that can cost money. And as an example, we rig time and everything else over a couple years spent 5.5 million for this particular operator. Squeezing shoes. So here's a good question. Why did the shoe test fail? So I'm going to ask you to answer that. We have about 20 minutes. We'll continue. Why do shoe tests fail? I hinted at it before. Give me what you feel is your number one reason. If you don't agree with what I say, I'll try to convince you otherwise. But what do you think? Why do shoe tests fail? We pressure up on the shoe below the cement and it breaks sooner than I expect, sooner than I want, sooner than I need. What causes failed shoe tests? Any thoughts that just pop into your head? Why do shoe tests fail? Why do they fail 15% in the Gulf of Mexico? In certain areas, they fail quite a bit. Any thoughts? I know someone has a thought. Thank you. Because of the well-born nature. Interesting way to put it. I'm not disagreeing with you, Miriam. Okay. Thank you. No, I appreciate the comments. And what I'm about to tell you, because Jamo has said mud homogeneity, that means we didn't do the test correctly. And that for sure can be a reason. Here's what I did. I went to work for this company, and my only job was make sure shoe tests don't fail. So after the first 4 weeks, you know how many failed shoe tests we had? 0. We didn't have a single failed shoe test. I remember the president coming in one day. He put his hands on my shoulders and he said, "Have we squeezed any shoes?" No, we've had all successes. And I remember the president saying, "That's why we hired this guy. Keep up the good work, Kirk. No shoe squeezes." And I thought, well, that's wonderful, but I haven't changed anything we've been doing. I'm just studying this. So came that day, I came to the office. I'm walking down the hallway for that morning meeting, and I hear in the hallway, we had to squeeze a shoe. I heard it in an office. I went back and listened. Did you say we had to squeeze a shoe? Yep, last night we had a failed shoe test. Uh-oh. I'm not going to get praised too much this morning, so let's do it. And the more I started thinking about it, a few weeks later, we had another failed shoe test. The president, he still liked me, but he wasn't as enamored, or he wasn't bragging about me so much. So I thought, you know what? I've done this throughout my career, but I'm going to ask all of everyone's opinions. And so I would ask every engineer that had a shoe test fail, why did it fail? And here's the list that I've come up with. Interesting list. Jamo, you said it right at the beginning. Poor mud properties. Someone else said this word earlier, these words, bad cement. Still don't know what bad cement is, but bad cement. Casing point selection. Maybe it's the formation is too weak where we're setting the casing. You can go down the list here from pumping too slow to no centralization, channeling. I like this one. Has something to do with the cementer. I don't know, but every time Rick is out on the cementer, we have a failed shoe test. Wrong interpretation, permeable formation. We'll talk about the hesitation method not employed. How about this one? A cementing expert came up with that we were using rubber tires instead of natural gas to make the cement as kiln fuel. Can you imagine that? They started using rubber tires. They would use it in the fall, and he noticed more shoe failures in the fall. I don't know. And then cracked wellbore. Here are the two that I want to tell you from my experience that stand out. The formation. Look at this. This was from a paper that I wrote. 3 service companies I compared in this study, and a number of operators in another study. What do you notice there? Who's the best cementing company? We'll have to move along. We got about 10 minutes, or about 15 minutes. We'll go longer. And why is operator A that much bigger than operator E? And who is operator A and operator E? The service companies are all the same for the most part. If you think Schlumberger is better, we had a failure after this, dropped them to 78%. So they're all about the same, but the operators differ. It's not the cementing. It is the operator. And it's where the operator is drilling and where he's setting his casings. I'm going to skip over this for time, but think formation. We're going to test against the cement. I saw 2 major failures of the cement. Once we used a glucose-based mud, a sugar-based mud that didn't cement. This mud doesn't exist anymore, but it retarded the cement so the cement didn't set up. We did the test, circulated all the way to surface. Another time I remember we were stuck. Didn't move the casing on bottom for days. After we cemented, did a shoe test, got returns to surface. But here are the jobs that are the most unsuccessful. Lost circulation wells. I'll show you the data. That's a condition of the formation. Exploration wells. Very high in failure rate as we try to find and understand the strengths of the formation. That's formation knowledge that we lack. In the Gulf of Mexico, there were certain locations of the formations we were setting in that failed. Geographic. I saw this in Oman. We drilled all sorts of wells in one area. We shifted over to a different part of the field, started having shoe test failures because the formations at those depths were weaker. And then LOTs versus PITs or FITs, when you take them to leak off, when that's what we're doing, again, it's the way we test the formation. So we took 24 failed shoe tests. We focused on the shoe. Maybe it was the shoe track issue, but look what happened there. The shoe track average depth for failures was a huge amount, 194. We had pressure tested and drilled hard cement in 96, all but one well. And so it really wasn't the shoe track from that standpoint of cementing. What was it for cementing? If there were critical factors for cementing, here are the big 3 that stood out. Where we did not centralize and where ultimately it could have been the failed cement job, we were almost twice as likely to have a failure of the shoe test with no centralization. Pipe movement was an issue. Where we were stuck and couldn't move the pipe, we were 1.5 times more likely to have a failure. The same was true with losses. If we could move the pipe, 1.6 times more likely of success. If we didn't have losses, the same way, 50% more likely to have success. Here's what didn't seem to matter, and this is a separate study of about 3,500 wells and a study of 200 and something wells. Mud properties, spacer volumes. We used to employ a hesitation method. At the end of the cement job, we'd slow down and try to squeeze the shoe. We found out that didn't work. And the service company, it didn't matter. We'll close with squeezing the shoe. This is very important because when you fail, you want to know, did the cement fail or did the formation fail? If you put that due diligence to it, you're going to find out so often it's the formation. And you need to think it very well could be the formation. In all of my studies, as I've traveled around the world, I would say 95% of the time it is the formation. So when I squeeze the shoe, I have to know how to do it based on that. We're going to look at 3 things here with squeezing the shoe, and then we'll close. Do I go high pressure or low pressure squeeze? Do I use a tool, a packer, or a retainer? Or do I use a balanced plug method or the Bradenhead method? And do I use low fluid loss cement or high fluid loss cement? First, high pressure or low pressure. A low pressure squeeze is just when our hydrostatic plus our pump pressure minus the friction is less than frac gradient. High pressure, it's greater than frac gradient. Are we pressuring up to crack the rock or not? I always want a low pressure. In almost all of my squeezes, unless I'm trying to reconstitute a formation, I want low pressure. I always want this. I usually get this. The rock is usually cracked, or as I start to pump on it, the pressures with the cement and solids just increase. I will tell you, in looking at almost 29 squeezes in this independent study, every time we started to squeeze, we had to take the pressure up. As a matter of fact, when we filled it with cement and tried to pump cement in, if we had used cement for the leak-off test, we would have passed the leak-off test. We had to go up above frac gradients. Understand that even though you want the low pressure squeeze and you think you might be squeezing a channel, when you go to put the cement in there, watch that pressure. Now we're going to back off that because sometimes you can drill out and you can break the entire formation down, and then you're trying to do a lost circulation squeeze. Low fluid loss or high fluid loss cement. When we're talking about fluid loss, we put cement in a cell. We have a 325 mesh screen. We apply pressure, and how much clear fluid drops out of it? How much water can we squeeze out of the cement? And we do that with our fluid loss cell in the lab. Do we want all the water to leak out, or do we want the water to stay in? If all the water leaks out, it goes into the frac or the perf in this case, but it goes into a crack. And as it bridges, all the water leaves and it packs off with a lot of cement. If you have very low fluid loss, it doesn't pack off and it keeps traveling in. For the shoe squeeze, generally speaking, we want to use high fluid loss cement. As I say, in most cases, we are pumping into the formation and do not want to frack and crack. And low fluid loss cements, the water staying in, keeps on going. It doesn't bridge off. If you're absolutely sure there's a channel, if that is clear to you that you have a channel and it's going up and then going out to a formation, then you want to use a low fluid loss cement. The problem is, if you ask the service company for a squeeze slurry and you don't dictate that, you're probably going to get a low fluid loss cement because that's what we think of with squeezes. The shoe squeeze is different. And as I just mentioned, if you have total losses when you drill out, I don't know if you've had that happen, you know the shoe test has failed, you drill out and you lose everything. On a well we were on in Vietnam, we did 37 squeezes and it all just went away. You can pump cement forever. When we used a lighter weight cement. Sometimes we'll put a pre-flush in front of it, but a lighter weight cement and high fluid loss, we were able to get that squeeze on one attempt. Because we likely, in that lost circulation, are going out through a crack. In this case, here's a crack 4 inches, and we're just pumping. We need to be able to block that off. And finally, do we use a squeeze packer or balance plug? If we're going to use a squeeze packer, you can use a retrievable packer. Often if we're in looking for holes in the casing and we find out it's not holes in the casing, it's going out the bottom, we'll use a squeeze packer since it's already in the hole. You may also be able to run a retainer that's drillable to do the squeeze. When you're doing the packer or retainer, you circulate the cement very close to the shoe. You then either stab in with retainer or you close the bypass with the packer and you bullhead the cement. So you're bullheading a volume ahead of the cement and then bullheading the cement into place. If you're doing a Braden head shoe squeeze, many prefer this, then you're going to the bottom open-ended, circulating a balance plug on bottom, pulling up above that and displacing into the wellbore. In this case, why people prefer it, you're covering that area that may have a channel or a crack, and you're filling it and making sure cement initially cement is going into those areas. What we learned is that whether you use a Braden head squeeze or a packer squeeze really didn't matter, at least in our studies. In certain situations, you may want to use one or the other. But we had the same success rate, and we gained LOT value, average 1.4 ppg. Half of the jobs got more than 1.5 ppg. 84% increased it greater than 0.6 ppg. Understand this though, you may be squeezing a channel. That's what we're doing for the cement job. But one thing we are likely doing, filling cracks. We're filling fractures, filling cracks, drilling 5 feet of new formation that's uncracked. And so we expect that LOT to go up, whether we're squeezing a cement channel or the formation. I'll leave you with a couple references. The paper on shoe tests is entitled Pressure Integrity Test Interpretation by Dan Postler. This is the paper. I remember when I met Dan for the first time, I was a bit in awe because I love this paper so much. And then I found out Dan was just a normal human being. But we did a couple things together. I recommend that paper. Although it may not be written beautifully, one paper that we've written on shoe tests when at Halliburton was the cementing factors involved in obtaining successful shoe tests in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a study of over 3,000 wells that we looked at. Those are two papers I recommend, especially the first one. I'd like to conclude just by summarizing in these ways. Both the LOT and the FIT, shoe tests, they measure the strength of the well bore. Others can use them to measure the strength of the formation and determine other things from the shoe test. But the main reason we use it is to know what mud weight, both for kick detection and for drilling the next hole section. Consistent shoe test procedures are very important. I've had failures before where we just did the test wrong. Companies interpret and use the LOT in different ways. I worked for in-house at one company. They are conservative. They want the virgin rock strength. We want to know what it is. In deep water, we'll start to see it bend. What we want in deep water is get the maximum value that we can manage. So even though we're getting a leak off, we're able to do that. And I want to touch on one more area that I passed up in regard to that. Very important. So as much as this may look horrible in video, I got to go back to it. And that's this one. We're going to spend 5 minutes on this curve before I go back to the conclusions, because I think we jumped right over it. Matter of fact, I'm sure we did, and I'm not sure why. This is the heart of what our conclusion is, and that is, how do we interpret the log? Let's spend 5 minutes on this. If we go to the leak-off curve, that's leak-off B. I want to give you a few choices of what that leak-off test value is. This is an important part. Can't believe I almost skipped it. A is our casing test, B is our leak-off test, C is our maximum minimum, our maximum volume. D, I call the area of compressibility. You may get funny shapes down here if you have compressible fluids, but let's follow this curve. This is the leak-off test, and I'm going to give you a few points. Is leak-off E? I start to get a curve. Is it F? That's when I stop doing my test at its maximum point. I then shut down, maybe count to 10, and I get G. Then H, I start to get at H a short period of time after I shut down. Let's say this is 10 seconds. And then I have I, which is an inflection point in my leak-off test. I'm going to give you the choice of E, F, G, H, or I. What is the leak-off? And we'll talk about that for just a few minutes, and then I'll conclude. If it is F, and Muhammad has said F, Aliyah has said F. If it is F, what is happening at E? I like it. Miriam just said it's all of them. I like that. It's all of the four. Omar says E. Jamo, F. I'm going to go back to Miriam's answer. It's all four. It's all four. Here's what's happening. We're not leaking off here. We're building up pressure just like a casing test. At E, there is an inflection. Something has changed. I assure you it's leak off that has changed. And I don't know if we're leaking off through a crack or through permeability, but at a certain pressure, as I get less pressure for the same volume, that fluid's going somewhere. It is leak off. In deep water, for example, E may not be enough for me, so I keep going. I need more to drill this well. And as long as I'm increasing pressure, I can manage that. So if I'm on a deep water well, I promise you, quite often we're using F as the leak off. Now at F, we're pumping into it. E is just a leak. I agree, Jamo, but I don't know what kind of leak it is. Was there a crack already there that I'm now opened? Or that I started now leaking off into with pressure? At F, I've shut down. That's where I've stopped. And yeah, it looks like I've got all I'm going to get out of this rock before it breaks completely. I shut down. G is my instant shut in. There are companies that want to play it very conservative. They're going for rock strength and they'll choose H. Others will be even more conservative and try to find closure at I, at another inflection point. The answer is all four can be used. If I'm picking E. If I'm on a deep water well, I've got F. If I'm trying to determine my actual rock strength, I'm going down lower. So it's all according to what you're trying to achieve. I'm trying to figure out how we jumped over that little message or lesson. And yes, it does depend upon the condition of what we're trying to do on the well, what regulatory bodies will allow us to do. In critical situations, we have to get approval for F and to show that we can manage that curve when we know that there is something occurring at E. We may design future wells based upon G, H, or I. John was talking about, he makes a mention here, you probably can't see it, for more safety, we choose the lower. I understand that completely. I understand that completely, John. I know a lot of companies that do. You have to remember, a lot of companies are just running the FIT. They're not living in a world where they have to manage this. But I understand completely. It's a good comment. Well, once again, not too pretty on the video, but here we go, and we will conclude. Boy, thanks for hanging with me on that. We just said it. Companies interpret and use LOT in different ways. We just got a quick lesson on that. I am estimating, I have traveled all over the world doing shoe tests and shoe squeezes. I estimate that 95% are related to the formation. Where I will drop back off of that is where we have a very close distance between a depleted formation and where our shoe is set. Where we get critical cementing, we have to have a perfect cement job to keep from moving up in anywhere near that weaker formation. But I am confident that as we look at our shoe cementing, we need to be very careful to blame it on the cement. We're evaluating the cement, let's evaluate it rightly. There are several well bore and LOT issues that increase and decrease the LOT values. We saw it from viscosity to whether you have a good mud column, to pump rate. Critical factors in cementing shoes when we cement them: centralization, pipe movement, making sure we don't break the rock, and making sure we don't over displace the cement job. And I will safely say that squeezes, when we squeeze the shoe, at least in my studies, 85% of the time, we're going to increase the wellbore strength. We can safely say whether it's the channel or whether it's the formation, we're increasing wellbore strength. Well, thank you for your attention. This concludes cement evaluation. 3 lessons on bond log interpretation and how we interpret the primary production, usually production interval, and then on the intermediate and surface strings shoe tests, which include leak-offs or other pressure integrity tests. Thanks again for attending. I'll answer questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. It was a great session as usual, and I would like to thank you for your efforts. It was an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you.
We have one question. Someone is asking, what is formation ballooning, please?
Could you repeat that, please? You cut out there.
What is formation ballooning?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of skipped over that. The question is, what is formation ballooning? And that is when you're allowed to pump volumes into a formation, but the formation fracture expands and takes the fluid, but doesn't break. And when you stop pumping, it gives it back to you. It's kind of like blowing up a balloon. The balloon doesn't break. You stop blowing into the balloon, the air comes back out. So it's kind of formation breathing or ballooning, when you are doing a shoe test in a ballooning formation, the pressure will be higher because it's not, you're not breaking the rock. It's kind of a rudimentary explanation.
Okay. Thank you, Engineer Harris, and thank you all. The session will be uploaded to PyPetro YouTube channel, and don't forget to solve the quiz on Google Classroom. And a quick reminder, the final exam will be this Friday, November 27. We have three different timings: 2 p.m. Second exam will be 8 p.m. and the third one will be 2 a.m. next day, all in Egypt time. And please, just take only one exam. Best of luck and thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you very much.